U.S. tariffs and duties on softwood lumber sit at 45%, and the president has threatened to add more.
Today is the last day of operations.
Well, the sector really has been in crisis.
We saw ourselves in this budget. It's just such a crisis moment for our sector and for our people right now. It's tough to be overly optimistic.
Canada's forestry sector, once a steady economic engine quietly driving jobs, exports, and regional growth, is now slipping into a slow, uneasy decline, and the shock on the surface feels almost staged. The reality is far less sudden. What looks like a surprise is really the result of long-building economic pressure, years of policy friction, trade barriers, rising costs, and operational bottlenecks stacking up until the system could no longer hold. And right on schedule, public reactions are turning dramatic, with leadership figures rushing to respond as the cracks become impossible to ignore.
Pressure on the sector is just relentless, and you have a chart for us that shows the pretty steady decline in our lumber, our forest exports to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, this is an industry that's been hit on a number of fronts. This is just the latest, as you mentioned, 45% effective tariff rate. That includes 35% on those duties that went up from 15% since Trump took office.
Let's be clear, this didn't just happen out of nowhere. The strain on Canada's forestry economy has been building over time, quietly tightening its grip across key regions. From major production zones like British Columbia to smaller resource-based towns, the warning signs were there, clear, visible, and persistent, but meaningful economic adjustments, slow, tangled, and often disconnected from the realities businesses are facing on the ground.
There's really been two fronts where two major challenges, as I think most people know, that we're facing a severe issue with the United States with 45% tariff on our softwood lumber exports.
Now the consequences are showing up all at once. Mill closures, job losses, shrinking output, and a growing sense that a core part of the economy is weakening. This isn't just about one industry, it's about supply chains, export revenue, and the stability of entire local markets. Take British Columbia as a prime example. Known for its massive forest resources and global lumber reach, it's now dealing with intense economic pressure from both external and internal forces hitting at the same time.
But also just within British Columbia, our regulatory regime is quite complex. And that's been limiting our access to fiber, which is our number one cost, and it's been very costly to operate in British Columbia.
On the global side, there's the ongoing trade tension with the United States, where Canadian softwood lumber exports are facing tariffs hovering around 45%. That's not just a policy detail. That's a massive cost barrier cutting directly into pricing power and competitiveness in one of the most critical export markets. When margins shrink like that, companies don't just adjust, they start pulling back, scaling down, or shutting operations entirely. At the same time, internal economic friction is adding another layer of pressure. The regulatory environment surrounding forestry operations has become increasingly dense and expensive to navigate.
If things simply continue like they're going now, Kurt, I mean, what does the future of your industry look like?
Well, we're hopeful that we can turn it around. I think I think the province recognizes that things have been out of balance, and there's a number of initiatives underway to sort of work on our regulatory regime. And
industry voices point to rising compliance costs, longer approval timelines, and limited access to harvesting zones, all of which slow production and increase uncertainty. In economic terms, this is a classic supply constraint issue where the cost of accessing key inputs keeps rising while output becomes harder to sustain. And that key input, fiber, is where things really start to tighten. Fiber isn't just another resource, it's the foundation of the entire forestry value chain.
Probably doing a little bit of reminiscing. I would imagine it's a pretty somber place to be.
The mill is in operation for 70 years and employed roughly 1,800 people at its peak.
It's been the lifeblood, the heartbeat of the Cowichan Valley for decades.
But now, it's becoming harder to secure and significantly more expensive to process. Companies are dealing with restricted access, higher extraction costs, and operational delays that ripple through the entire system. When your primary input becomes unstable, the rest of the economic structure starts to wobble. Efficiency drops, production slows, and profitability takes a hit. This is where the broader economic impact becomes real. Mills can't operate at full capacity, output declines, and local economies, many of which depend heavily on a single industry, start to feel the strain. What once functioned as a stable economic loop begins to break apart under pressure. And then comes the moment that turns all these economic signals into something impossible to ignore.
Biggest single taxpayer here in North Cowichan, and it's not something we're going to recover from overnight, that's for sure.
North Cowichan's Mayor Rob Douglas says the municipality has been facilitating supports for the roughly 350 workers affected since December, when the mill announced it would permanently shut down.
I understand some of them have found new jobs, some are getting new training, but there are others who are slipping through the cracks.
After 70 years of continuous operation, one major mill has shut down completely. Not temporarily, not partially, fully closed. At its peak, it supported around 1,800 jobs, acting as a central pillar for the surrounding economy. That's not just a workplace, that's decades of economic activity, generational employment, and community stability suddenly disappearing. On its final day, workers clocked out for the last time in a quiet, heavy atmosphere. No dramatic scenes, just the weight of an economic shift settling in. It's the kind of ending that highlights how structural changes in an industry don't just happen on paper, they happen in real lives. The economic fallout spreads quickly beyond the facility itself.
Could be processed here in our sawmills here, and the pulp mills could actually get that refuge fiber, and then that refuge fiber would employ thousands of people here on the coast.
At next week's council meeting, North Cowichan will be considering a resolution regarding raw log export.
Around 350 workers were directly impacted following the closure announcement. Some have transitioned into new roles, others are retraining to fit different sectors, but a significant number are struggling to stay afloat within existing support systems. Gaps in employment insurance and retraining programs are becoming more visible, especially when transitions happen this fast. This is where the numbers stop being abstract. Behind every job lost is a financial reality, mortgages, household budgets, long-term plans, all suddenly thrown into uncertainty. It's not just an industry adjusting, it's entire communities trying to recalibrate under pressure.
Whether or not to reach out to the province and the federal government to look for some solutions to address some of the challenges with the raw log exports.
A small maintenance crew will stay on after today to take care of any environmental obligations.
We are hoping that something does happen with it, whether it's another pulp paper operation or some other industrial use.
Local economic leaders are now moving fast, trying to stabilize the situation, pushing for investment, exploring diversification strategies, and attempting to rebuild momentum. But rebuilding an economic base like this isn't instant. It takes time, capital, and coordination. And right now, the pressure isn't letting up. There's already talk about repurposing the closed site, with multiple investors circling and exploring what could come next. But let's not pretend this is a quick turnaround. Replacing an industrial operation of that scale isn't something that happens in a few months, and it's definitely not guaranteed. When a major employer disappears, the economic aftershock doesn't just fade away, it lingers, reshapes the local economy, and can take years to stabilize.
What is it that BC can still control when it comes to your industry?
Well, as I mentioned, I think our regulatory regime, we're really in the short term dealing with some issues around cutting permits and the cost of operating in British Columbia. I think over the longer term, trying to, in terms of our land use planning, getting greater predictability around the land base and developing more of a working force so there's a greater certainty around access to the fiber.
Then there's another layer to this situation that's stirring up serious economic debate, the issue of raw log exports. Critics are getting louder, arguing that shipping out unprocessed logs is draining value straight out of the domestic economy. The argument is straightforward: we're sending away opportunity If those logs stayed and were processed locally, they could fuel sawmills, support pulp production, and create thousands of jobs across multiple stages of the supply chain. Instead, what's happening? Raw materials are leaving in their most basic form, while domestic facilities are left fighting to stay operational.
Yeah, I mean, this is an industry that's been hit on a number of fronts. This is just the latest, as you mentioned, 45% effective tariff rate. That includes 35% on those duties that went up from 15% since Trump took office. But even before Trump 2.0, this is an industry that has long faced tariffs, or duties as they call them in the industry.
From an economic standpoint, that's a value chain breakdown, where higher value production steps are lost, and with them jobs, investment, and long-term growth potential. This isn't just a trade choice, it's a strategic economic question that's now front and center for policymakers across both provincial and federal levels. At the same time, industry leaders are walking a tight line between realism and cautious optimism. Many are openly calling this a crisis. No sugarcoating, no soft language, just a clear acknowledgement of the pressure building across the sector. But they're also pointing to possible solutions, regulatory reform to reduce operational friction, smarter land use planning to improve resource access, stronger workforce development to adapt skills, and expanding export markets beyond the United States to reduce dependency.
And then the industry, it's gone through the U.S. housing collapse, wildfires, a number of mountain pine beetle. So there's just been a number of challenges that have inflicted this industry.
The challenge? None of these are fast fixes. These are long-term economic shifts that require coordination, investment, and serious commitment. And this is exactly where frustration starts to rise. Because while industry experts are talking about deep structural changes, what people are seeing publicly often feels reactive and short-term. Announcements come out, support packages are introduced, funding gets allocated, but on the ground, the core problems aren't moving fast enough. That gap between messaging and reality is creating tension. For workers and communities directly affected, it's starting to feel like their voices are getting lost in the process. Even with federal support measures, loan guarantees, financial aid, and assistance programs, there's a growing feeling that it's just not enough for a situation this severe.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at the last couple decades, it has been a BC decline in the industry. Other provinces have held up relatively well, but they're also down. So you've seen a number of things happen. The mountain pine beetle disproportionately hit BC. Then you add the duties on top of that, and then some more domestic policy issues.
It's like trying to stabilize a major economic system with small temporary fixes. People aren't just asking for short-term relief. They're asking for stability, clarity, and a real plan for the future. They want to know if the industry they depend on is going to evolve or slowly fade out. And yet, even with all this pressure, there are still signs of movement, real attempts to adapt and innovate. Companies are experimenting with new products, exploring advanced technologies, and finding different ways to extract value from wood resources. One of the biggest developments gaining attention is mass timber, a fast-growing segment using engineered wood to build structures that would traditionally rely on concrete and steel. It's a shift with serious economic potential, opening doors to new markets while aligning with global demand for more sustainable construction, but scaling something like this, that takes time, capital, and a stable foundation. 3 things the industry is struggling to secure right now.
But then also we can look at trying to diversify our markets as well, and that's. But in the short term, there's limited opportunities there, but it's something we should be pursuing as well.
Okay, well, BC's Premier, BC's Forest Minister, and the interim leader of the official opposition there, they are all set to speak at your convention this week.
At the same time, bioenergy and bioproduct development are gaining traction. Companies are looking at leftover materials, residues, waste products, and turning them into new revenue streams. It's about squeezing more value out of every part of the resource, improving efficiency, and creating additional economic layers. These ideas aren't brand new, but the urgency behind them is. Businesses are adapting because they have to, not because conditions are ideal. It's resilience in action, but let's be real. resilience alone doesn't fix deep structural economic problems. And those problems, they're still very much in play. Now, step back and look at the bigger economic picture, because one of the most misleading ideas out there is that forestry is just some isolated regional industry that only matters to remote towns. That narrative, that falls apart fast once you actually follow the money and the jobs. This sector isn't tucked away. It's deeply connected to the broader economy, supporting tens of thousands of jobs across multiple layers of activity. We're not just talking about logging sites or mill towns. This stretches into transportation networks, supply chains, equipment manufacturing, financial services, and a whole ecosystem of support industries that rely on forestry staying active and stable. When this sector weakens, the impact doesn't stay contained. It spreads outward slowly at first, then all at once. Take British Columbia as a clear example. The forestry sector there supports around 95,000 jobs, and here's the part that surprises people. About a quarter of those jobs are located in the lower mainland.
And the latest is you have West Fraser coming out announcing that they're closing the 100 Mile House mill, which is 150 to 200 jobs. But it's not just BC. Here in Alberta and high level, West Fraser's announced they're going to curtailing indefinitely their operation.
An area not typically associated with forestry at all. That includes roles like logistics coordinators, accountants, transport operators, and service providers who are all tied into the same economic chain. So when mills shut down or production starts slowing, this isn't just a local disruption. It's the beginning of a broader economic slowdown across the province. It hits employment, reduces business activity, and starts tightening financial flows in ways that aren't always immediately visible, but they add up fast. And yet, despite how wide-reaching this impact is, the response still feels slow and uneven. Industry leaders have been repeating the same core economic priorities: streamline regulations, improve access to fiber, and create more predictable land use frameworks. These aren't extreme demands, they're practical adjustments aimed at making operations smoother, more efficient, and globally competitive.
Well, as I mentioned, I think there is some receptivity and some acknowledgement that more needs to be done. But as I mentioned, we're also in a crisis mode, and so we feel like this needs to happen faster. And so I think it's a matter of executing on some of the things that have been identified.
But here's where things get stuck. Implementation drags, policies get reviewed, consultations stretch out, discussions keep going. And meanwhile, the pressure on the ground keeps building day by day. There's a growing gap between what's being discussed and what's actually changing in real time. Then there's the issue of market concentration, something that's been talked about for years but hasn't shifted enough to reduce risk. Right now, the United States still dominates as the primary export destination for Canadian softwood lumber. That level of dependence creates a serious economic vulnerability. When tariffs rise or trade tensions increase, the entire sector feels it immediately. Prices get squeezed, demand shifts, and companies are forced to react quickly, often by cutting costs or scaling back operations. Expanding into new global markets could help balance that risk, but building those relationships isn't instant. It takes infrastructure, long-term agreements, and strategic investment, none of which can be rushed in the middle of an active crisis. Meanwhile, public messaging around the situation has been mixed, to put it lightly.
This is the industry in turmoil right now. The federal government has come out with some measures, and we're going to have to wait and see how effective they are.
We actually talked to Tim Hodgson, the Minister of Natural Resources, yesterday. He's launching this task force. There's only so much he can do. But it was interesting. He seems to be interested in exploring with the industry.
On one side, there's clear acknowledgement that the sector is under pressure and needs change. On the other side, the level of urgency coming from industry and affected communities doesn't always seem to match the pace of action. And that's where frustration starts to sharpen. Because when people hear reassurances while watching layoffs happen in real time, confidence starts to drop fast. Words alone don't stabilize an economy, actions do. You'll often hear the phrase, weathering the storm, being used to describe what's happening, and sure, it fits, but it also raises a serious question. How long is this storm supposed to last? For workers facing job losses, for communities losing their main economic drivers, and for businesses barely holding on, this doesn't feel like a short-term disruption. It feels like a major shift, a turning point that could reshape the entire future of the forestry economy if the right moves aren't made soon. And that's the situation for today on Yesterday Canada. If you want more updates like this, drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next.